Thank you so much, Gilman. And it's wonderful to be here today. I love coming to this beautiful community. The first time I came over here, Practitioner Mark was kind enough to show me all of the things that are in this building, all the historical things that are just so wonderful. And this building was dedicated by Ernest Holmes himself. And this is one of the early churches in religious science. So it's really wonderful to be here in this historic place, and you guys are keeping it all alive and happy and filled with joy, and I'm really pleased to be here. Well, I'll tell you, when I was asked to do this talk, I was really excited to be able to come here, and then I realized what the topic was: sacred sexuality. And of course, we don't talk about that, as Mark said. Usually in a church setting, we don't talk about sexuality and sex per se. And I thought, oh no, I really need to call Dr. Ruth. You know, not the Dr. Ruth here, but the Dr. Ruth Westheimer. And ask her for some advice, right, about how to talk about this. And I think everyone is of an age in here that you remember Dr. Ruth, and she was a really incredible personality. She had a television show, radio show. She did columns, and she was very frank about sex, and she answered any question that came up. And she's 4'7", so I have a few inches on her, which is unusual, right? And she has a very interesting history herself, because she was a survivor, or she is a survivor, of the Holocaust. And when she was a child, her parents, or her mother, put her on a train and got her to safety, and her parents did not survive the Holocaust. So she's a survivor. And she has come through that with this incredible wholeness and completeness, and just this joy for life, and the ability to talk about difficult subjects like sex, right? And I really appreciate her for that. So I thought what I might do in just a minute is read some quotes from her. But I wanted to give you a little bit more about the process for preparing for this talk. Well, I thought, okay, well, I'm in my 7th decade, so, I'm at this point in my life, right? And I'm thinking, well, what about younger people? What is going on with teenagers now with sex? I had the sex talk with my kids, right? And, I was very professional about it, I suppose. And a professional parent. So you can get the sense of that. But I thought, okay, I'm going to go watch some television programs and see what kids are talking about with sex. And I'm happy to report that the same issues that we've all had as young people coming up, they're still there. So nothing much has changed in terms of sexuality and the kinds of questions that people have about their own sexuality. So Dr. Ruth is just a joy. I just had so much fun looking at the kinds of things that she said. And we're in February, that month of love, and we're really talking a lot about all the colors of love this month. And talking about sacred sexuality is one of the colors of love. That's a focus. That's a real incredible part of our lives. So this is what Dr. Ruth had to say. Curvy women need to visit a museum. Men have been attracted to those curves forever and still are. They can't help it, and that helps you. And then she also said, is sex different on Leap Day? And we have a Leap Day coming up, right, this month? I'm not telling, you have to try it yourself. And a reminder to single ladies, February 29th is Sadie Hawkins Day. Only once in 4 years can you use a calendar to ask a man out. Can't decide between watching the World Series or the GOP debate. And we can put that in terms here, right? The Democratic debate. That's easy. Turn the TV off and stare into each other's eyes. And that was on Twitter. So Dr. Ruth is up to the times using Twitter. She's about 92 years old now, too. So she is right there with us in guiding us around sexuality. So I want to also bring into this whole talk the idea that sexuality is with us forever. And I said I'm in my 7th decade, right? So I've been around for quite a long time. I have a lot of experience, life experience. And I was talking to a friend recently, and she said, you know what? My granddaughter asked me a question because she is in her 70s and she recently started dating. And the gentleman spent the night with her. And her granddaughter came out and realized that there was a man in the house, an older gentleman in the house that had never been there before. And she was shocked to find out that there was a man in the house. And she asked her grandmother, do old people have sex? And we got such a big laugh out of that because it is a part of our lives from day one, from the time we are embodied as human beings to the very end. It's always there. It's always a part of our life. It is always present. And it is there for us to enjoy. And I love the caveat that is given by Ernest Holmes. He says that there's the only thing or the only limitation and condition that would restrict us other than this is our life must be lived constructively in unity and love and sympathy with everything around us if we expect to live it to the fullest. So that's really the key, right? When we talk about any of our life as human beings, we are charged with living our lives constructively. The title of this talk is Sacred Sexuality. And I have a colon after that sacred sexuality. And for me, that's love in a time of light and shadow. Now, we've heard a lot about controversies that have been coming up around sexuality. A lot of abuse has started to rear up, to bubble up, and we've been addressing it in our own way. And sometimes it's been addressed constructively. At other times, it's been addressed in a less constructive fashion. But this is all a learning process that we are embarked upon. And I believe that, yes, we have these deep shadows right now that are showing up in all areas of life. But we also have this tremendous light that is there, that is throwing things into sharp relief that we need to pay attention to. And sexuality is one of those. And, I think about someone like Dr. Ruth who, talked so frankly about sex. And, if we look at, we turn the TV on, there's sex everywhere. If we look at magazines, there's sex everywhere, the movies, whatever, right? And yet it still seems like kind of a taboo subject. It is hidden. So what is that about? What is going on that there is something that is blocking us from expressing one of God's greatest gifts to life, that sexuality. And I believe that there's several things that are going on. We are not just the product of our particular era. Sometimes I think, well, you know, I was born in the 20th century. I'm very influenced by the 19th century. And I'm living in the 21st century. But there's even more, right? There's more. We're influenced, you know, by the whole of human history. All of that goes into this consciousness, human consciousness, and it finds its way into our lives. So there's things that have happened over the course of history that have brought us to this place where we can be surrounded by sex and sexuality, and at the same time we are not able to really fully enjoy it because of different things that might come up for us. And I know that as religious scientists, we don't talk about sex and sexuality all that much, even though we do invite everyone to come as they are and who they are completely. But we don't go into the details, right? So one of the things that I've noticed is that, you know, during the course of history, especially in the Western world, there was a time when people split in philosophy the idea of mind. So mind was good. Anything below the mind, the head, the brain, you know, all that thought, the body was bad. So that's some of the baggage that we're carrying still. And it comes out in different ways. And some of you may have been brought up in religions where there was a lot of shaming around sexuality. And I've worked with some people who have been really traumatized by the kind of shaming that they received in their early religious upbringing. And, you know, that is that split that has happened. And what do we say as religious scientists? We always talk about our wholeness and our completeness, right? So there's not a split between the mind and body. We're working to repair that split and to understand that we are embodied. We are not just spirit. We are embodied spirit. And as embodied spirit, we're here to have all of the experiences of that body. And, you know, it's actually so beautiful and so wonderful that, you know, when we open our eyes and actually look at it, it is incredible that we have this opportunity in this life to live in this way as embodied spirit. Now, that happened, you know, about 500 years ago, that kind of split that we can identify in history. And when the Protestants came, mainly Protestants and Catholics came to Canada in the U.S., and I'm speaking of Canada in the U.S. because that's where we are, the part of North America we are right now. They brought with them this incredible idea of work, right? The work ethic, that you just had to work. And we live with that today, don't we? We live with that a lot. In fact, people remark on the way that Americans in particular are always on the go. They're always working. It's difficult for them to take a vacation. For example, in Europe, people have a month off. And here, what do? People may take a week. If you're lucky, you may have 2 weeks. together that you take off. But there's just that idea that you have to work and work and work and work. And there is a reality to that too, that, the economic system is such that some people do have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to maintain their life. But there's that ethic, and we don't question even that because it's so ingrained in who we are in this culture. So this is a time for us just to breathe in and understand that it is wonderful that we have been given this life, and this life is a life where we are supposed to enjoy ourselves. We are to enjoy ourselves and not feel any kind of shame or recrimination or be thinking that we need to be doing something else besides living life in the fullest way imaginable. And as I look out, I know that everyone here is that divine being. Right here, and right now. We are all divine beings. And I know the divine has fun because I've seen all kinds of things in this world that are so delightful, all kinds of animals that just make you think, wow, that creation is ever creative and it is wonderful. All kinds of life, all kinds of formations, all of that is a part of that creative process that is so wonderful. Now, sacred sexuality, and I love the quote that you did this morning, Mark, because it really does bring that whole idea that we have in the past had a relationship to sexuality that, basically was built around fertility. But there was that sacredness to that fertility, that continuation that was honored and loved and just understood as something that is necessary but also divine. So this is a part of life. And, as we developed as human beings, a lot of this was swept away as different religions developed. And a lot of that is still there, though. We get that feeling. And sexuality goes beyond all of, the whole idea of fertility, but it's very much a part of that. Sexuality and fertility, is connected in that it's not just a man, a person-to-person sexual encounter. It includes the entire human family, because any mother will tell you how wonderful it is to give birth, and that's part of sexuality. Well, maybe not all women, but I will give my experience. Giving birth to me was one of the most wonderful things that ever happened. And it was a time when I really felt like I was connected, not only to the child I was carrying, but also to every other woman that was giving birth in that moment. And that's an element of sexuality, that deep, deep connection, that incredible connection to other people, that relational part of life that makes life worth living. And I also felt just a different kind of, I was in a different state, right, in terms of my consciousness in giving birth. And I didn't take any drugs or anything, but there's something natural that's taking place that, involves hormones and all of that. But I think it goes beyond that. I think that we're actually touching the divine at that moment of going through the whole process of birth, because it's part of that creative process. And that connection, just that seeing something that was so much larger than myself in those hours of going through labor, was incredible. And I'm glad I get to talk about this in church. Sometimes we shy away from that, but it was an incredible experience. And when a mother is holding their child and nursing their child, that's also an element of sexuality. And it's deep pleasure for that child to be fed, right? And it's deep pleasure for that mother to be able to provide that nourishment to her child. So that's sexuality too. And it's beautiful. And there's nothing that should impede any of that, because it's a natural flow of life. And if we think about what people in the West have done, or in the U.S., I will say, oftentimes for a mother to nurse a child, they're asked to go somewhere else, right? Don't do that here. And there are actually movements of women who are working actively to make this, a more, to reinstate it as a natural part of life. And, it's not as if women are doing anything that is unnatural or unkind or harming anyone or doing anything wrong. It's just natural. So that is also a part of sexuality that we can recognize and accept as that beauty. What happens sometimes, I think, when we talk about the shadow is that because there has been shame attached to sexuality, then there's that fear that wells up, and then everything has to be shut away, right? Everything has to be shut away. And there have been abuses. We know there have been abuses in all kinds of ways. And yet, here we are, we're integrating all of those things that have been a part of the side of sexuality that can be destructive, any kind of power abuse, anything that might be impeding the relational interaction between equals. And that movement of light that says this is what sexuality is. Sexuality is God-given. Sexuality is beauty. Beauty. That's a God quality. Beauty. And that pleasure and that delight is also a God quality. So we don't have to fear pleasure. But we do have to train ourselves to experience pleasure in a way that we are overflowing with kindness and sympathy and a true desire to love. Now, love is always that key, and I love Gilman for bringing all these love songs forward today. And love is that key. It's really that key that changes everything. Because when you truly love, there's going to be that stepping into a relationship in a very different way. it may start out when we're young, very ego-driven, right? But as we gain experience, I think that we get deeper and deeper and fall deeper and deeper into a realization that love is sacred. Sexuality is sacred. And we can reach those points. And the everyday is the best way for us to live our lives. We don't have to go and separate ourselves and live on top of a mountain and isolate ourselves. We don't have to say, don't do this because it's bad. But when we bring love into it and we integrate all of these qualities, we have something that is present, that divine is present in the everyday. Now, I really, really love country music. And there's one thing about country music, they always say, well, is that a God song or a girlfriend song? And, there's some songs that I think, oh, yeah, that's definitely a God song. It's probably a girlfriend song, right? But to me, it's a God song. So I love this one. It's by George Strait. And it goes, when you see me, see a shooting star in the night. When you hear the warm wind whisper through the pines, I want you to know it'll be me and my infinite love for you. It's just like I promised you under heaven above. It will live on after we kiss goodbye, forever by your side, my infinite love. When you think someone is calling your name, when you feel that kind of feeling you can't explain, now you will know it'll be me and my infinite love for you. It's just like I promised you under heaven above. It will live on long after we kiss goodbye, forever by your side, my infinite love. And every time I hear that song, I think, oh, God's singing that song to me. Because when we have that divine encounter, and it happens in our lives over and over again. And one of those divine encounters is that sexual love, right? And it doesn't, the act of sex doesn't last forever, right? But because it is so powerful and we get a glimpse of that divine, if we are open to it, we will see it everywhere, won't we? We will see it in the stars. We'll feel it in that wind. We will be reminded over and over again of divinity that is a part of our lives in every moment. And it just takes us to wake up to it. And how do we wake up to it? We just become present and open to it. When we're present in that moment, we are open and ready for it. And I want to, there's Isaiah 65:1. And in Isaiah 65:1, if you unpack it, what God says is that God is present even when people are not listening. God is present.
We're going to get the hand mic for you.
Okay, I use my hands a lot, so I hope I don't throw the mic out there. So in Isaiah 65:1, God says that he is always there. And even when people aren't listening, even when people aren't looking for him, even when people are not receptive, God is always there. And that's what this is about, right? When we are open and receptive, when we are that moment when we are receptive, when we are awake, and when we know we are fully alive, God is everywhere. God is everywhere. And that is that moment of enlightenment. And, you know, a lot of times we think about enlightenment as something that is only attainable to the spiritual masters, right? But I know that each and every person here has had an enlightened moment in their life. Practice, our spiritual practices, bring those enlightened moments in more frequency until at some point that's how we're living our lives. Enlightenment is not a noun. Enlightenment is a verb. It's active. It's how we live. And it's the same with sexuality. If we are open to sexuality, even, you know, supporting the sexuality of others, it doesn't even have to involve us in any way, other than we're always involved. When love is out there, we're always the recipients of it. Anytime there's love, we're the recipients of it. And therefore, let's support it. Let's be for it, right? Not against it. Let's don't oppress it. Let's allow it to be liberated and free. And that's exactly what I hope we do as we move into this coming week. That we are open and receptive to all of the divine in the everyday, whatever that everyday might be. If it is your sexuality, if it is feeling the warm embrace of one of your loved ones, that is the gift. That is the joy. That is the wonder of our lives. And I am knowing that each one of us leaves here fully charged and alive to our own sexuality. You know, it's alive. Like my friend said, yes, old people have sex too. And young people do too. We're all a part of it. It's from birth until we make our transitions. And so it is.